So unless you've been sleeping under a rock, then you've probably heard of IGN, one of the biggest and most mainstream game review sites on the internet, and they've garnered a lot of hate and memes directed towards them over the years for numerous questionable review scores given to various games. But they remain indisputably very popular. And today I thought I'd take a look at the scores given to all of the major Destiny releases through the years by IGN, and we're going to start with Vanilla Destiny 1.
Within production that boils down simply to this. Destiny is a mechanically excellent, visually evocative FPS housed within an underdeveloped RPG framework. The gear game might hook you for the long haul once you fully understand it, but Destiny is ultimately unable to reach the same lofty heights of the games it's trying to be.
So a 7.8 out of 10. I think this score is probably a little bit too high. If anything, it was probably a 6 or 7. And of course, many others at the time would have given it a score much lower than that. Destiny not reaching its potential and under-delivering on so many aspects of the game that could have all really been great was cause for major disappointment for a lot of Bungie fans, especially at release, but like myself and many others, we all wanted to see it reach that potential because despite a lot of the issues the game had, there was so much that got us hooked. Like the world design and atmosphere, the addicting loot game, the fluid gunplay, and honestly PvP. PvP was a huge reason this game succeeded and was able to survive as long as it did. But now it's time to hear what IGN thinks of The Dark Below.
First expansion for Destiny, and I was not super pleased with it.
Yeah. There's a lot of problems with the DLC.
Yeah,
I'm not happy with it either.
Yeah, I think we both kind of feel like this is not our jam. This is not what we want the future of Destiny to look like.
Correct.
Big part is because just the most important thing I can say about this is that there is such a lack of, for the price especially, there is such a lack of content.
Let's talk about those story missions for a second.
Yeah, let's do that. Yeah.
In particular, those are disappointing because this was an opportunity for Bungie to go, okay, fans, we've listened to your feedback, and we really spent a lot of time on this story and its integration into the product, and we made it special for you. No, none of that's accurate. You go talk to somebody in the tower, she gives you missions, and it gives you a whole separate rank-up system. And that's where this story falls apart. Not only does it give you a separate progression system that you need to work on, it locks out core owners of Destiny from content in the game.
Yes, which is terrible.
And then existing players who had done the raid, Atheon raid in Vault of Glass, they all busted their butt, myself included, to hit 30. All that progress was wiped out. All those weapons are now lower than weapons you can buy in the tower.
Right, you can get better stuff.
Yeah.
From vendors now. So that's kind of where I stand. Again, ended up giving this a 6.0. Destin, thank you so much for bringing your expertise, which is quite substantial to the discussion.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So The Dark Below, 6 out of 10. Again, probably a bit too high. The story missions here were very lacking, and the fact that vanilla weapons and armor were kind of sunset was such a huge slap in the face after a very tedious grind it was to reach level 30 and grind out all these top tier weapons and armor pieces, and having to do things like re-level exotics was just stupid. However, we did get 2 pretty good strikes and 3 crucible maps, and the raid was fun. Crota's End, of course, didn't age super well, but it was challenging and enjoyable at launch. However, it was pretty buggy and prone to some fun exploits. But progression-wise, the game was not making the right steps, and hopefully House of Wolves would fix some of those issues.
Destiny's first expansion, The Dark Below, was a painful lesson, but House of Wolves learns from those mistakes. It doesn't fix Destiny's story woes or its stingy loot system, but it introduces new gear upgrade paths that make sense, alongside fun new missions and endgame activities, so long as you have a regular group lined up to play them. House of Wolves feels insistent to get players to the new level cap quickly. New legendary gear drops at a high light level, so players don't have to spend too long chasing bounties and experience points. Weapons still require some investment, but not nearly as much as they did before. Unfortunately, this approach only applies to the new stuff, and Destiny's loot system still feels as miserly as it did before. A welcome in-game drop, called Etheric Light, does allow you to ascend previously acquired gear to the new damage threshold, but in typical Destiny fashion, it seldom drops in PvE. Speaking of PvE, the short 5-mission campaign is fun while it lasts, with an explosive opening and well-designed encounters that add some fresh gameplay twists. Still, outside of livelier performances by characters Petra Venge and Varix, there's not a lot of plot here, so don't expect any storytelling miracles. The other piece of House of Wolves PvE is Prison of Elders, a fun wave-based activity that suffers slightly from lack of variety. House of Wolves wisely eliminates the worst parts of the Dark Below by offering a faster method to level gear, a better campaign, and varied endgame activities, assuming you have a regular crew to partake of them with. If you don't, expect to get a lot less out of this expansion, but overall, it's still a step in the right direction for Destiny.
House of Wolves, 7.5 out of 10. Probably a fair score, to be honest. The story was much better than Dark Below, and Trials of Osiris and Prison of Elders were great additions to the endgame, and Vanilla and Dark Below endgame content both became relevant again thanks to Etheric Light, allowing us to infuse everything to the new level cap. And honestly, during House of Wolves, it was probably one of the best times to be playing Destiny. A lot of the vertical progression grind was toned down, and even parts of the horizontal progression were a bit lessened, like upgrading damage stats on weapons that just wasn't a part of House of Wolves' weapons and armor. The House of Wolves gear itself, however, was pretty underwhelming, besides the Trials loot, but players didn't mind because they could use all of their favorite stuff from Vanilla and Dark Below, and House of Wolves really was just a good DLC that extended the endgame and pushed Destiny in the right direction.
This expansion is the shot in the arm that Destiny needed. This challenging co-op gauntlet isn't the only thing fueling our lust for better loot drops and great shooting in the new expansion. There are plenty of changes, big and small, that make Destiny a much better game. The short but sweet campaign, menacing taken enemies, clever bosses, and rewarding loot system, combined with another inventive raid, have made these late-night play sessions a regular thing. The campaign is a fun highlight, with a succinct 6-hour story that uses clever level designs, gorgeous cinematic cutscenes, and funny dialogue to keep me intrigued and invested. It's a shame the storytelling effort fades into the background once again once you wrap up the campaign, but the volume of things to do kept me too busy to complain. Completing the many quest lines never felt like busy work because of the intelligently designed taken enemies and boss monsters. Each one brings something unique to the table. A few bosses that show up in the Court of Oryx are hit and miss, but overall, the Taken King's bosses are more memorable than big bullet sponges. When the fights are over, we're showered with lots of useful rewards. That fixes one of my biggest complaints about Destiny's initially stingy loot system. The endgame raid, King's Fall, requires teaming up with 5 friends to play, which highlights Destiny's ongoing lack of matchmaking tools. But once you organize, it's the single best piece of the Taken King expansion. The way it uses impressive scale, involved teamwork, unique puzzles, and difficult bosses to craft a one-of-a-kind shooter experience. Destiny the Taken King is an awesome upgrade that's addressed most of my biggest problems with Destiny over the past year. The rewarding loot system, fun enemies, and many quests have kept me busy long after the story missions have ended.
Taken King getting a 9 out of 10 makes perfect sense. Not everything was perfect, I guess, but it solidified Destiny as an experience that brings countless unforgettable moments. I may disagree with him a bit on saying that the story came to a halt after the campaign, because we had the Taken War quest line that expanded on the story throughout the rest of the entire solar system, not just the Dreadnought, and other quests like the Wolves of Mars campaign that had tons of story expansion for the Fallen. Like seriously, the Wolves of Mars quest was like another campaign. It was probably as long as like a House of Wolves campaign. King's Fall was a masterpiece. The 2.0 update changes to leveling, questing, and progression was such a massive improvement. New supers. There was just so much to love and almost nothing to dislike when it came to the Taken King.
In a lot of ways, Destiny Rise of Iron is more of the same. When it does the Destiny formula well, it's polished with challenging combat and plenty for a veteran Guardian to do. A lot of the time, though, it falls into the same trap Destiny's always been susceptible to and turns into a seemingly endless, repetitive grind that often feels empty. The new 2 or so hour campaign is emblematic of how Rise of Iron as a whole stacks up. It definitely brings more of what I already like about Destiny, like taking on waves of spongy enemies and fights that are all about your positioning in the area, but it does little to improve upon Destiny's strengths or fix its problems. The campaign starts out well balanced for players of different skill levels, but the combat from one mission to the next never builds on itself or does anything we haven't seen from Destiny before. Destiny's combat remains as fun as it's ever been, but that's the problem. It's pretty much exactly the same in Rise of Iron. Most of Rise of Iron's new content takes place on Earth in areas we've already seen, but now that Siva's tendrils cover the land, there are new and clever places to take cover that make it feel fresh. The story itself unfolds more clearly than most in Destiny, which was refreshing, though it's not a terribly good story in general. After that, it's disappointing that there's little to alleviate the repetition that comes in between finishing most of the new content and doing the raid. The Saving Grace is a challenging, satisfying raid that combines greatly increased difficulty with far more intense tactics than anything else in the expansion. It's a great raid, but still a bit disappointing in that it feels a lot like what came before. I wish this expansion had focused more on fixing Destiny's repetition problems, because it has a few good ideas. But with all its pitfalls, this is just Destiny going through the motions.
6.2 for Rise of Iron, huh? Pretty surprised it was this low, to be honest. I mean, it wasn't nearly as good as Taken King, that's for sure, but it delivered on so many fronts, and some even better than Taken King. It really just expanded on the areas that Taken King made improvements to over year one. Some of the highlights were the overhauled Iron Banner progression, and it did have some of the best loot Iron Banner has ever seen. The Siva enemies were great, probably the most fun raid in Destiny 1, fantastic new social space, artifacts with perks. I think it really evolved the game just right coming off of Taken King, but that's just me. But that is the last of Destiny 1 content, so it's now time for Destiny 2.
Destiny 2 succeeds where the original failed the most. It delivers a story-driven campaign good enough to match its finely tuned first-person shooter gameplay and great looks. Gathering loot and upgrades through missions and activities with my fire team, and then finally running the climactic raid together was a blast. And every time I thought I was scraping the bottom, Destiny 2 teased me with more to see and do that was just a few light levels away. From the opening moments, Destiny 2 delivers Dominus Gall, an excellent antagonist whose cruelty deserves our fury. The campaign is filled with brilliant cutscenes that give the cast an opportunity to show great emotional range, and you can hear the sadness and determination in their voices. That context kept me moving forward through fun missions set in eye-catching environments, including the exhilarating penultimate mission. While the final boss was underwhelming, I was left hungry to learn more about the world of Destiny. Thankfully, the excellent quests and more elaborate strikes add much improved boss encounters and an extra dose of story. The 4 world maps do a fantastic job of setting the tone too. Whether it's the milky waterfalls of Nessus or the overgrown European Dead Zone, each offers a colorful and unique palette to explore as you acquire their plentiful loot. And while there aren't a ton of different weapon types, the constant gear drops with game-changing exotic weapons and mods propel your power level higher, creating that feeling of growing strength and readiness to take on all challenges. The biggest change to balance is the smart adjustment to one-hit kill power weapons. In the player versus environment, or PvE areas, the bright purple ammo packs are in constant supply. But in competitive game types, it can only be acquired by one player when the power ammo spawns in on its timer, leading to more explosive moments and fewer cheap deaths. Thankfully, the more standard kinetic and energy weapons feel balanced across the board. Destiny 2 is a blast out of the gate thanks to its excellent co-op shooter gameplay and strong storytelling in the campaign. Not all the features I'd expect to find are there, but it does deliver the same kind of highly social gameplay and rewarding loot-driven progression that helped the original keep me hooked for hundreds of hours. The main concerns right now are a few bugs and lack of event options, but I'll definitely be sticking around to see this big, action-packed universe develop over time.
8.5 for Destiny 2 Vanilla. This review really has me confused, as did many reviews at the time, because it felt like, did we play the same game? Destiny 2 Vanilla was such a watered-down, less interesting game than the first, with nowhere near as good of a story as some of the reviewers made it out to be. I think the only reviewer who absolutely nailed how many of us felt was SkillUp. The apathy he felt toward the game and thorough explanations he gave as to why Destiny 2 Vanilla was one of the biggest disappointments in gaming perfectly encapsulated my feelings, as well as so many others. I had never been so let down than I was with Destiny 2 Vanilla. I played maybe a month and did the raid once before I left the game for 3 months, played Curse of Osiris for maybe 5 hours, was already max level, and just put the game down again until Warmind. I never saw myself doing that with the Destiny franchise, but Destiny 2 Vanilla was so awful for me, and to see it get rave reviews from mainstream sites just baffled me.
The almost entirely sparse and dull content of Curse of Osiris for Destiny 2 makes it one of the most disappointing Destiny editions to date. Some of its highlights include a brief 2 to 3 hour campaign with a hollow story, a tiny public space with little to do, and just a couple of new multiplayer maps. Its only saving grace is the challenging and rewarding raid layer activity. The unexciting 9-mission campaign ends with a shockingly easy boss fight after just 2 hours. The story is no better, with a majorly anticlimactic encounter with the supposedly mighty Osiris. The only good parts are the 2 integrated strikes, which present a glimpse of Mercury during a time when it was a much more lush, vibrant, and inviting place to visit. Their boss fights squander a lot of potential though. You don't get to see that until revisiting them in the Heroic Strike playlist. So we're left with Mercury, a beautiful but boring destination with just one new public event, only one measly lost sector, and a few treasure chests. It's easily the smallest playable public space in Destiny 2 with the least going on. Its only real interesting feature is the Infinite Forest, a space that opens up after the campaign and allows you to play through simulations of the past, present, and future of Mercury. But frustratingly, with all the potential of time travel, its story is forgettable too. While Bungie did attempt to address a few community complaints by adding incentives at the tower vendors like ornaments for your armor, it's too little too late. Beyond the disappointingly flat campaign, a trio of surprisingly fun strike-like adventures and a handful of new weaponry lay waiting for you to enjoy and acquire respectively. The raid layer is a fantastic addition that is the one shining beacon within the entirety of Curse of Osiris. Its puzzles were really fun to figure out, and its boss battle gave my veteran crew much more of a fight. On the PvP side, things are momentarily a hilarious, on-balance mess because of the Prometheus lens glitch, which Bungie says will be fixed shortly. The new maps, including the PlayStation exclusive, are well designed, offering many avenues for engagement and vertical platforms that make things much more interesting than on the initial batch of maps. On the other hand, Crucible, the lifeblood of Destiny 1, is left in its current stale state, requiring reliance on the disc-like team shooting to succeed. To put it simply, PvP is not nearly as fun as it was in the original, and Curse of Osiris has done nothing to help the situation. Curse of Osiris landed in Destiny 2 with a thud. Its campaign and story are a bust, its new content is mixed and buggy at best, and it does nothing to address the community's loud cries for fixes to the endgame. The few redeeming features are its more challenging and varied adventures, and the raid layers puzzles and tough boss battle.
5.5 for Curse of Osiris. Yeah, Curse of Osiris was probably the lowest point in the Destiny franchise. I'd argue it has nothing redeeming about it. Everything about it was below mediocre. There was so much to say that went wrong with this DLC, but if you want a more in-depth look at that, just check out my Destiny 2 Dark Ages video that goes into a bit more detail. And IGN was pretty accurate in this review actually. However, I don't think the supposed puzzles in Eater of Worlds were fun or challenging. They were barely puzzles. The boss Argos was fun, but everything before that was a big fat L.
In many ways, Warmind succeeds in bringing back the mystery of Destiny 2's universe. There are plenty of secrets and story details to uncover, alongside new paths of progression to enjoy in both PvP and PvE. However, none of these address issues Destiny 2 has been facing for some time. The grind is more confusing than ever, and the story seems cobbled together. Still, I've been more motivated than ever to sign on and level up so I can take on new challenges. Warmind benefits greatly from the sweeping Season 3 update that launched alongside it. For example, exotics like Graviton Lance can now create quite a spectacle of destruction, and vendors have objectives making them feel less like glorified slot machines. The bigger problem is how unclear the path of progression is. It's baffling, including the still intact obtuse and messy mod system and a strike playlist that doesn't reward at its power level. It's downright unintelligible the way it gives higher rewards for easier encounters. One way Warmind brings back the feel of classic Destiny is the secrets and hidden treasures you can uncover. Discovering new and hidden treasures has been a treat. The big addition here is Escalation Protocol, a wave-based horde mode that spawns waves of enemies until you fight a final boss. Up to 9 people can join, but the odds of getting friends into the same event is highly unlikely or requires advanced networking tricks. That's a huge miss because Escalation Protocol is a very fun encounter that I'd love to play with friends instead of relying on luck to take down the challenge. The raid layer, called Spire of Stars, offers a few fun mechanics that require participation in puzzle solving from all team members. I love the group dynamic of this encounter, and the final boss offers a more difficult than normal challenge. But as much as I love solving puzzles, we desperately need to return to the original Destiny's formula of pitting Guardians against a sequence of impressive fights.
Also, this raid again takes place on Kalos' ship, which has overstayed its welcome. I am desperate to visit a new location to meet an entirely new enemy. If you've been waiting for a big new change to jump back into Destiny 2, the team at Bungie still has a long road ahead to win back your trust after Warmind. There are a lot of positive changes with the sandbox tweaks, and there are several difficult encounters to face. But it's one step forward, 2 steps back, and Bungie seems cursed to repeatedly release updates that get a few things right while also convoluting systems that no one took issue with.
Warmind 6.0. Pretty fair, I guess. The story and loot was still terrible. Wasting characters like Zolan Nokris on story missions and strikes was awful, but he isn't wrong about the mystery returning to the game, with more fleshed out exotic quests and meaningful discoveries. Escalation Protocol was fantastic, and Spire of Stars was better than the Leviathan or Eater of Worlds. The Crucible updates were good, especially with the competitive incentives for top tier weaponry, and it was making some good steps towards being a better Destiny.
Destiny 2 Forsaken is everything I could have hoped for in an expansion to Bungie's shared world shooter and more. With impressive cutscenes, including the gut-punching death of Cayde 6, it adds drama and a darkness that keeps me motivated. The raid offers intricate challenges and larger-than-life bosses to destroy for any team brave enough to face them for a chance at great rewards. All of this, and a plethora of incentivization improvements to the power level grind, make Destiny 2 feel like the game I fell in love with again. Each new and returning character brings a welcome voice that adds a new mystery to the universe we thought we knew so well. Spider specifically acts as a catalyst to weave the adventures right into the campaign by sending you on missions around the Tangled Shore. It's nice to see this adjustment in delivery in contrast to the previous approach where they were easy to miss. It's also refreshing to see a new enemy type, the Scorn. Their unique character models and behaviors shake up the combat loop after years of taken versions of everything we faced before. It's a great example of how the excellent storytelling and gameplay extends to the new strike missions. All of these additions are complemented by a complete rework of the sandbox. If you want to wield any crazy loadout like 3 shotguns, you can do that now, which adds more flavor to the mix. Armor and weapons of the same type will have unique aspects that encourage you to keep different sets until you get that perfect drop. This makes Destiny 2 feel mysterious again, and each drop is exciting right now as it could be that perfect roll or bring you one light level closer to the max. The Crucible benefits most from the sandbox changes. Bungie has finally addressed the time to kill issue so many fans have been asking for adjustments to. There are a few overpowered pieces of armor like Ursa Furiosa, which I've seen allow 4 supers back to back. Pro tip, don't shoot the shield. Thankfully, Bungie has a good track record of addressing imbalances like that quickly. The superb Gambit mode is unlike anything I've seen before. Facing off in a mix of PvP and PvE challenges is exhilarating, and planning the appropriate strategy with my team gives me a great feeling of camaraderie and accomplishment. While I usually focus on the power level grind, I found myself enraptured in the experience of stopping invaders with my teammates and melting final bosses with our carefully planned strategy that we implemented for an amazing streak of wins. Thankfully, with Forsaken, you can do whatever you enjoy the most to level up, and all of it feels like it's in a great place right now, thanks to all the system changes. With Destiny 2 Forsaken, I keep coming back to that old aphorism, a rising tide lifts all boats. This update not only has improved Destiny 2 in some very meaningful ways for those buying the expansion, but also for people who didn't. Thus far, Bungie has delivered on all fronts and then some. They've not only brought back what made me love the first Destiny when it was at its best, but also added a ton of requests that fans, myself included, have wanted for years.
Forsaken 9.0. Yeah, Forsaken pretty much saved Destiny 2. Truly, it did. Bungie took everything they learned during Taken King and Rise of Iron, and what worked so well with them in D1, and implemented it here, while also expanding on it in key areas. So much new content across the campaign, the destinations, the new Gambit mode, so many new strikes and Crucible maps, the first ever dungeon. Every single area of the game was touched up and built upon. The raid is incredible, being the largest and most epic. The sandbox changes, the loot, all of it was so well done. Forsaken was nearly perfect.
If Shadowkeep makes anything crystal clear, it's that it was built for the hardcore audience that stuck with Destiny 2 for years through good times and bad, even if its new features run the risk of confusing and alienating new players. With important changes to Destiny's sandbox and an added focus on RPG mechanics, customization, and high-end loot to chase, Shadowkeep is a big step in the right direction in a lot of ways, but also feels like it's setting Destiny 2 up for a bright future that isn't quite here yet. Precisely when the stakes seem to be highest, you're dropped back into a patrol zone and left to discover that the campaign has ended with absolutely no fanfare. What? Sure, Shadowkeep's story has some great chapters, but it ends up feeling like the first act of a larger story that probably won't be completed in the near future. While it's great to see Bungie setting up so much for Destiny 2's future, it's hard not to walk away from the campaign with a bad taste in your mouth. In true Destiny fashion, the end of Shadowkeep's campaign is where the larger experience begins, in the form of endgame activities. In other words, a grind more threatening than any raid boss could ever hope to be. Bungie's made a big push for everything to become more complex, more customizable, more RPG-like, and downright nerdy in a good way. Armor 2.0, the new and improved quest tab, and additional progression systems provide more rewards and customization options for truly committed Guardians. But progressing in each of these areas has a massive treadmill attached to it. At least for now, Shadowkeep adds a modest amount of new content, but it can all be experienced in less than a week of regular play. That means you'll need to replay the same stuff over and over again if you're hoping to reach max power level and unlock the most significant rewards, and that's a little daunting. It's not that giving everybody a ton of things to do and items to chase is a bad thing, but the ratio of added grind versus actual new content is heavily out of balance. Even if you love a strike the 10th and 11th time you play through it, that's a time investment and repetitiveness that might drive even the most hardened Destiny 2 player to drink. The good news is that the content that Shadowkeep does add is largely great, even if it feels like there's too little of it. Plus, Bungie has a content calendar that promises more coming in the future, all of which is built into the $30 cost of this expansion. While the bosses themselves are basically just bigger and slightly modified versions of existing enemy types, the stellar mechanics and high degree of difficulty makes it one of the best raids in all of Destiny 2. On the other hand, the Vex Offensive, which is a simple series of arena battles against hordes of Vex, is less impressive. Simply put, it's a bland and monotonous grind that doesn't provide much of a challenge, or any interesting mechanics to master, or anything that helps advance the story. Shadowkeep improves Destiny 2 in a wide assortment of ways and gives dedicated fans a taste of things to come from an independent Bungie, but it's ultimately just a taste. Once you've burned through it, you're met with a daunting grind that makes up the bulk of this expansion. Even so, there's a lot to love about the improvements to customization, and it's hard not to get excited about the story Shadowkeep sets up, even if it doesn't develop it very far this time. It's clear this is just the beginning of a brand new chapter for Destiny 2, and I couldn't be more excited to see where it goes from here.
So Shadowkeep scored just shy of an 8. Shadowkeep was Bungie's first outing as a company on their own, self-publishing, and it did underdeliver in many ways. There was some decent new content, and thankfully still some additions to the core game in the way of 2 strikes and 3 Crucible maps, but it was definitely the weakest fall expansion we'd seen up to this point. It felt like an incomplete experience, like it was just a part 1 of an expansion, and in some ways that was probably intentional to set up this new era of Destiny, but it didn't feel like a complete package.
As the first in a trio of expansions, Beyond Light takes some bold steps in a new direction for Destiny 2. Whether it's the story's darker tone, the removal of legacy content, or our formerly exemplary Guardians giving in and using the corrosive power of the darkness. In many ways, this is not the same Destiny 2 we've been playing for the past 3 years, and that can be very exciting. But Beyond Light also finds itself making some of the same mistakes all over again. With a campaign that's too short and an endgame that has you grinding the same activities ad nauseum, it can occasionally leave you feeling left out in the cold in a very familiar way. This story is one of the strongest in the series, mainly because Aramis is the first Destiny villain to have clear and relatable motives that actually make her sympathetic. Many of Destiny's best characters also receive a ton of much-deserved screen time, including the Drifter, Varix, Eris Morn, and the Exo Stranger, who we haven't seen since 2014, but now takes the spotlight in a major way. Like most Destiny expansions, though, the campaign ends too quickly at around 6 hours long, and it leaves you with plenty of loose threads that aren't likely to be addressed anytime soon. As a result, the fight with Aramis and her stasis-wielding army ultimately feels like a side quest in an epic odyssey that will take the next 2 expansions, and potentially beyond, to play out. Europa itself is a well-crafted, frosty wasteland filled with darkness-wielding Fallen and milk-filled Vex that gives you plenty to grind for, but it offers few surprises. But once the campaign ends and you're running around Jupiter's moon doing public events and patrol missions that you've already done 1,000 times, the frequent whiteouts can get old pretty fast. Like most Destiny raids before it, Deepstone Crypt is a phenomenal, challenging undertaking that throws you into some of the most beautiful environments to be found in Destiny. Deepstone Crypt is especially impressive in that, for the first time, it's a raid that tells a cohesive story with a beginning, middle, and an end that can be more or less understood without burying your head in a pile of grimoire entries. Destiny 2 Beyond Light is another solid expansion to the ever-evolving shooter that you know and love, but falls prey to the same content scarcity and repetitious grind it's always had. The campaign is short but enjoyable, and the raid is awesome enough to make the less pleasant, overly snow-covered parts of the grind worth it in the end.
Beyond Light scoring lower than Shadowkeep is something that I actually can agree with here. Beyond Light did not evolve the game in any meaningful ways and took away so much good content and really didn't bring enough new stuff that we wouldn't notice. Not one-to-one new content to replace how much we lost. Nobody expected that. But it really did not bring hardly enough, and it emphasized how much content went away. Not all of the new content that came with Beyond Light was bad, but almost none for the core activities just felt terrible, along with not enough loot to chase to counteract sunsetting.
The reason I've stuck with Destiny for so long, through its highest highs and lowest lows, has everything to do with its incredibly strong foundation. Throwing flaming hammers at aliens just feels good. And while the past few expansions were adequate but flawed iterations that kept my appetite fed, the Witch Queen feels like a breakthrough that finally realizes the long-running looter shooter's greatest potential. This latest update provides not only Destiny's first truly phenomenal story alongside a campaign that's both challenging and memorable, but also a weapon crafting system that's a godsend for hardcore devotees like myself, new light-wielding enemies that completely evolve the flow of combat, and more. While some areas like PvP have still been left in a disappointing lurch, there's no doubt in my mind that the Witch Queen is otherwise the best Destiny's ever been. The star of the show is the Witch Queen herself, Savathun, the hive god of deception. But her story is much more than the usual Monster of the Week fanfare, where we drive a tank through her face and emote on her corpse in glorious fashion. The campaign can be completed in just 5 to 6 hours on its hard difficulty, but the ride is unique, challenging, and more inventive than any Destiny campaign before it. Once you've conquered the Witch Queen's campaign, there's plenty to do in the way of quests and smaller, repeatable cooperative activities. But as usual, when it comes to endgame content, the raid is king. This year's raid is called Vow of the Disciple. The trials within are enigmatic puzzles that require powerful gear, incredible teamwork, and fast reaction times to overcome, and it's some of the most fun the Witch Queen offers for those brave enough to tackle it. More importantly though, Vow of the Disciple also does some serious heavy lifting in terms of storytelling, and setting up for future events still to come in Destiny, something few other raids have done so far. Of all the new frontiers the Witch Queen offers though, none are so enticing as the long-awaited weapon crafting system, which is a joyous windfall for RPG nerds like myself. Now, instead of relentlessly grinding the same activities over and over in hopes of getting that perfect weapon with all the right perks you were looking for, you can simply craft it to your exact specifications. There are a few caveats though. First, doing so is every bit as needlessly complex as you might expect from Destiny, forcing you to juggle a bunch of new, confusingly named currencies in a process so hilariously dense you'll get whiplash coming at it straight from the fast-paced battlefield. And second, building your perfect weapon requires, wait for it, a whole lot of grinding. That's right, the new system that lets you avoid the grind for the perfect weapon is replaced by a different grind to level up a mediocre weapon until it's powerful enough to be crafted into its final form. While just about every inch of content added with the Witch Queen does everything right, its shortcomings are instead defined by what isn't there. That's embodied perfectly by the complete lack of additions both in Destiny's PvP modes and the PvE-PvP hybrid mode, Gambit. Once you step out of the excellent campaign and new content around it, which you'll almost certainly need to do during the grind to the endgame, you'll find that absolutely nothing has been added to Crucible, no new game modes, and not a single map. This isn't a new trend either, as Bungie has largely left their PvP options rotting on the vine, but the Witch Queen is yet another expansion that largely ignores the issues. It's getting harder to overlook that when Crucible and Gambit are stood up as such large cornerstones of what players are expected to do. Destiny 2 The Witch Queen represents the best expansion that Destiny has ever received. From the fantastic campaign, to its world-class raid, to the new abilities and weapons that will forever change the way I fight on the battlefield. I didn't think it possible, but by God, Bungie actually managed to tell an impressively good story in Destiny alongside all of that too. And that just warms my stasis-frozen heart. I still wish they showed more love to competitive multiplayer in Gambit, which badly need help due to the severe neglect they're currently experiencing. But overall, the Witch Queen has put a big, stupid grin on my face that I don't see going away anytime soon.
Witch Queen, 8.0. I would definitely agree with this score. Witch Queen had one of the best campaigns, great endgame quests, an enjoyable raid, and brought more than both Shadowkeep and Beyond Light. However, I definitely agree with IGN that it has some gaping holes in the content that it doesn't bring. Prior to Shadowkeep, all areas of the game were expanded when it came to the expansions, which meant that no matter what type of player you were, there would always be something new for you. Witch Queen not bringing Crucible, Gambit, or enough Strike content still felt pretty bad, when again the power level grind and bounty farming required still makes too much of an emphasis on running those core activities. Witch Queen honestly didn't do a whole lot of things wrong though. What it did bring was fantastic, and I think it's the second best expansion in Destiny 2, but Forsaken is a prime example of what I wish all expansions could be, but I don't think we'll ever see something as content rich as Forsaken again, as Bungie has noted multiple times. But after watching those reviews, I think for the most part IGN had some pretty spot on points, with the occasional questionable one. Definitely better reviews than they sometimes have for other games, and it's likely due to the game being an ongoing experience, and the reviewer likely has been playing the game for a while, and been familiarized with how Destiny works overall. I think it'd be kind of interesting to see reviews from people who started playing at each DLC, see how the people who are just getting into the game review it. I think that'd be pretty interesting. But thank you guys for watching, hope you enjoyed taking a look at these IGN reviews of Destiny with me. Leave your thoughts in the comments down below, and I'll see you guys in the next one.